Hi, welcome to an educational video on how to wreck an NBA franchise in 5 easy steps. In just a few short minutes, you'll be able to try it for yourself. The city of Vancouver, British Columbia was awarded an NBA franchise in April 1994. They'd eventually enter the league ahead of the 95-96 season alongside their Canadian cousins, the Toronto Raptors. Vancouver's team was originally going to be named the Mounties, but the good old RCMP, well, they didn't like that too much. So instead they'd land on Grizzlies in honor of the bear, which is indigenous to the area. And that's facts, by the way. I live near Vancouver and grizzly bears are so populous that we've actually turned them into common house pets. See? Step 1 of how to wreck a franchise. Hire the wrong people in positions of power. The Grizzlies took care of that when Stu Jackson was hired on in July of 1994. Jackson would eventually become president of basketball ops and general manager of the Grizzlies, a position he'd hold for 5 long seasons. Jackson was a young 39 years old and had previously coached the Knicks for a season and a bit, and more recently had coached the University of Wisconsin Badgers. Spoiler alert, Stu Jackson was not a successful NBA exec. Like, ever. This is confusing, but important. The Grizzlies were brought to Vancouver by local magnate Arthur Griffiths. He'd create a group called Orca Bay Sports and Entertainment with Seattle-based John McCaw. The group had ownership of the Grizzlies, the Vancouver Canucks of the NHL, and the building both teams played in. Trust me, it's important. Step 2 of how to wreck a franchise, have the NBA place wildly oppressive restrictions on your entrance to the league. In 1992, the Orlando Magic selected Shaquille O'Neal first overall, after just their 3rd season in the league. In their 6th season, led by Shaq, the Magic would make a run all the way to the NBA Finals.
That's good, right?
No, Carmela, that's not good. Not in the eyes of the NBA anyways, who didn't want to see another expansion team have quick success. So stupid, man. For the Grizzlies and Raptors entering the league, neither team was eligible for a top 5 pick in their first draft in 1995. Neither team was eligible to get the first overall pick for the first 4 seasons in the league, even if they won the lottery. They also weren't allowed to spend to the max of the salary cap for 2 seasons. Just dumb stuff all around, man. Anywho, the 1995 draft wasn't extremely loaded by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, the legend Joe Smith was taken first overall. The prize of the draft would eventually turn out to be Kevin Garnett, who of course was selected 1 spot ahead of the Grizzlies, 5th overall by Minnesota. At number 6, the Grizzlies would make their first pick in franchise history, taking Bryant Big Country Reeves out of Oklahoma State. Now, Big Country was... oh wait, I almost forgot. Step 3 of how to wreck a franchise, draft a bunch of pretty good NBA players. Ha, you're wondering why that's a bad thing. You're all confused now, I know it. Bryant Reeves was a large, lumbering 7-footer with a soft touch. This blandly presented mock draft from 1995, in fact, called him the best big man in the draft. Over the course of his first 3 seasons in the NBA, Reeves would average 15.2 points, 7.8 rebounds per game, very solid numbers. But he wasn't a star, either in production for the team on the court or for generating excitement on a nightly basis. He was simply a pretty good NBA player. More on this point later. The Vancouver Grizzlies would win their first 2 games in franchise history, including this dramatic game winner in their home opener.
Byron Scott, 2 seconds.
Unfortunately, those 2 W's were followed up with 19 straight L's. Then another 23-game losing streak later in the season, all resulting in the Grizz finishing dead last in the NBA. On the bright side, Vancouver boasted the 14th best attendance numbers league-wide, and they had a chance to pick first overall in the legendary draft. Oh wait, no they did not. The Grizzlies were again barred from the first overall pick, and the 76ers would select future Hall of Famer Allen Iverson. After Marcus Camby went number 2 to the Raps, Vancouver would grab Sharif Abdur-Rahim out of Cal. Sharif was a smooth 6'10" wing with impressive scoring ability. In 5 seasons with the Grizz, he'd average about 21 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Great numbers. Pretty good NBA player, that Sharif Abdur-Rahim. Later in the 1996 draft, however, Stephon Marbury, Ray Allen, Peja Stojakovic, local lad Steve Nash, and Kobe freaking Bryant were selected. And I'm not trying to disparage Sharif. Not that many players can say they average 23 points a game in an NBA season, but with a chance to drastically shift the trajectory of their franchise, the Vancouver Grizzlies walked out of the 96 draft with the 8th most valuable player according to win shares. And this wasn't an anomaly for them. this right here was the norm. Vancouver's second NBA season saw them finish a dismal 14-68, with attendance still holding reasonably strong at 17th in the league. There were just 3 eventual All-Stars in the 97 draft, with 2 of them, Tim Duncan and Chauncey Billups, getting picked ahead of the Grizzlies. The Grizz would take Antonio Daniels 4th overall. He'd eventually settle into a nice career as a solid role player, but keep in mind, at the time of the draft, some scouts had him pegged as the best point guard available. The 3rd All-Star from this draft, by the way, Tracy McGrady, who was picked 9th overall by the Raptors. Just a warning, I'm about to get a bit agitated right here. Step 4 of how to wreck a franchise: make player personnel moves that are void of any forward thinking and/or intelligence. After being a laughingstock for 2 seasons, Stu Jackson decided the Grizzlies roster needed a shakeup ahead of the 97-98 season. Fair enough. His idea was to trade a future first-round pick to the Pistons for a washed-up 35-year-old Otis Thorpe. Genius. The deal was a cap dump for the Pistons, and that future first rounder would eventually be the 2nd overall pick in 2003. Now, Jackson and company were long gone from the Grizzlies by then, and the Pistons would use that pick on Darko Milicic, but that's beside the point. The thought process behind this move epitomized the ineptitude that was the Vancouver Grizzlies. Let's jump ahead while I'm all riled up. The Grizzlies would get the 2nd overall pick in 1998, where they'd pick Mike Bibby out of Arizona. Because Mike Bibby was a point guard, the organization felt it made Antonio Daniels expendable just a year after they picked him 4th overall. They would trade Daniels to the Spurs for a player named Felipe Lopez, who was the 24th overall pick in the 98 draft. Again, we know Daniels would never turn into a star, but this was just 1 year removed from him being a top 5 pick, billed as the best point guard in the draft, and the Grizzlies just gave him away for a late first-round pick, a project prospect. That's such irresponsible asset management. Oh, and don't think I'm sliding past the Mike Bibby draft pick either. Mike would end up being, and everybody say it with me, a pretty good NBA player. You guys didn't say it with me. Bibby averaged 15 points, 8 assists per game in his 3 seasons with the Grizzlies, but obviously never moved the needle. Meanwhile, Dirk Nowitzki, Paul Pierce, and freaking Vince Carter were all selected after Bibby in the 1st round. Unreal. This was another draft in which the 1st overall pick restriction put on the Grizzlies didn't matter. Michael Olowokandi was drafted 1st overall, for goodness sake.
I don't know who that is.
Of course you don't, George Michael, and it doesn't matter. What matters is the Grizzlies couldn't hit on a franchise-shaping draft pick to save their life, even when they had chance after chance after chance. Oh, and in case you don't believe me that just one successful pick would have made a huge difference, here is my case. The Toronto Raptors. They were pretty pathetic in their first 3 seasons. Their attendance was starting to slip, and then they drafted Vince Carter. The Toronto Raptors are still an NBA franchise. Sometimes it's that easy. As Vince won Rookie of the Year and pushed the Raps into relevancy, the Grizzlies would win just 8 games in a lockout-shortened 1999 season. The 99 draft, by the way, well, it was the perfect cocktail of sadness for Vancouver. The recipe was simple too. Combine steps 3 and 4 from this video and pour over ice. With the 2nd overall pick, the Grizz would infamously draft Steve Francis, a future NBA All-Star lauded for his exciting brand of basketball. I mean, his name was literally Stevie Franchise. What a perfect pick. Just kidding, because Steve Francis refused to play in Vancouver. Steve literally looked like someone had kicked his dog when he heard his name called by Vancouver at the draft. After failing to convince him to join the Grizzlies, Vancouver would promptly trade him as part of a massive 3-team deal that, wait for it, the Grizzlies took a massive L on. Here's all the pieces involved in the deal. The best player that returned to Vancouver was a serviceable shooting guard in Michael Dickerson, but he really wasn't what the team needed. Okay, and from this point on, the Vancouver Grizzlies story goes from funny and, a sadistic kind of way to downright depressing. Here we go. Remember when I talked about how the Grizzlies were owned by a company called Orca Bay Sports and Entertainment? Well, John McCaw, who I also mentioned earlier, had taken full control of that company. After another brutal season on the court in 99-2000, McCaw decided it was time to sell the Grizzlies. The reasons for this can be summed up pretty easily. Money. The Canadian dollar was a killer for the franchise, as all salaries still had to be paid out in American dollars. Considering the team was already fighting an uphill battle on account of how bad they were, things weren't looking good. McCaw originally had a thought to sell to a local Pacific Northwest businessman, which could have potentially kept the Grizz at bay, but he pulled a Josh from Stamford and leveraged that offer for more money.
You leverage your new position with us into another offer?
The new buyer was a guy named Bill Laurie from St. Louis. Now, Bill made no bones about the fact he was gonna move the team back to his homeland soon as he bought it. Our guy David Stern, though, didn't like that idea and said no, and Laurie backed out of the deal. Just to reiterate, David Stern and the NBA blocked the sale of the Grizzlies because they didn't want them relocated. Just days after that deal fell through, however, a new buyer was found in Chicago-based businessman Michael Heisley. Oh, and yeah, this is step 5 of how to wreck a franchise. Sell your team off to, well, that guy. RIP to the late Mr. Heisley, of course. But gosh darn it, my man was a liar. At his introductory press conference, Heisley said all the right things, including,
I intend to do everything in my power to make this franchise a success in Vancouver.
Y'all heard that, right? Clear as day. Just over 1 calendar year later, as the Vancouver Grizzlies were in the midst of another sub-30 win percentage season, Big Mike had begun shopping the franchise around to various American markets. In March of 2001, Memphis was chosen as the destination city for the Grizzlies, and in July, the relocation was official. Remember when I told you David Stern and the NBA blocked a potential sale of the Grizzlies to prevent relocation? Well, where the heck were they this time? Was Heisley the Jordan Belfort of NBA owners, able to con anybody into buying a pen from him? Anyways, in just 5 simple steps, the Vancouver Grizzlies were dead. Heisley would defend the move by continually explaining how the Grizzlies were a money-losing machine and often blamed lack of fan and community support. The original ownership group has always lamented the dumb rules put in place by the NBA when they entered the league. To me, those are all just red herrings. The Vancouver Grizzlies were an atrociously run franchise that never put together an on-court product worthy of fans investing in. Oppressive rules or not, the Raptors were able to build a winner. Weak Canadian dollar or not, the Raptors were able to survive. Whatever way you slice it, I do acknowledge and lament the fact that the Vancouver Grizzlies weren't given a longer leash to figure it out. And so did the late David Stern, who once upon a time said, quote, I wish we hadn't had the Vancouver experience. Great city, and we disappointed them, and we disappointed ourselves.